Looking at the situation on the ground now, how likely is it that the Russian troops will be able to take over Kiev or surround it, as the US intelligence is saying? What are the chances that the Ukrainian army or the military is able to resist a Russian invasion, considering that they are outnumbered, they're outgunned, they fail in terms of, if you just compare the metrics in terms of the number of troops, in terms of the equipment that they have, and they're not getting help as of now from NATO or from the US?
Well, I think that they may be falling back into a guerrilla style war against the Russians. I don't think they necessarily want to mass their troops for a frontal assault. In that case, they would be easy picking for very powerful Russian weapons. I also don't think that the Ukrainians necessarily want to hold territory in terms of their cities. Russia is a nuclear armed power. If they held their cities from Russia, Russia could potentially threaten them. Russia is already putting veiled nuclear threats against anyone who helps the Ukrainians. So, this is something that I think is going to develop into a guerrilla warfare where the US and allies are supplying the Ukrainian insurgents, if they want to fight, which I think many of them will, with weapons such as the Javelin anti-tank missile, which is a shoulder-fired missile, or the Stinger air defense missile, which is also a shoulder-fired missile that can shoot down airplanes and helicopters. And some of them have already been shot down, according to the Ukrainian press, the Ukrainian government's press. Some of these Russian planes and helicopters have already been shot down.
But the US and some European countries are already providing ammunitions or firepower to the Ukrainian troops. Are these enough, though, at the moment?
Well, they're certainly better than nothing, and I think they might be enough. I mean, in addition to the weapons on the ground and the troops on the ground that Ukraine has, the US and allies are putting in very, very tough economic sanctions. I think economic sanctions like we've never seen before. Russia is not going to be able to use the US dollar anymore. They're not going to be able to use the pound sterling. It's going to make it very, very difficult for them to sell their oil and gas. Even with China, which is trying to promote the sale of oil and gas in the yuan or renminbi, a lot of that, most of their contracts, even with China, are in hard foreign currencies like the dollar and the euro and the pound. So what they're doing, China and Russia, is they're moving a lot of their contracts actually over into the euro, because the euro had not been threatened yet in terms of the sanctions. But I think that we're seeing very, very strong statements coming from the Europeans at this point. And I think that we might see euro-based sanctions as well as dollar and pound sterling sanctions on Russia now.
But will these sanctions work? Because, for example, if the US is blocking Russian assets, Canada is canceling export assets, UK is freezing assets of Russians in the UK, even those of the rich Russians, EU is freezing Russian assets in 27 EU countries. Will these sanctions actually work? The Russian government is saying it has $631 billion in reserve. So they have the money, but will that be able to last how long this conflict might take?
Yeah, I don't really think that they're going to win. I think that Russia is going to lose this conflict, and I think they're going to lose on multiple levels. There's the economic level that is really geared towards causing pain for the elites in Russia that might be able to remove Putin from power. That's a major goal. There's also the military level. Unfortunately, there will be Russians going home in body bags, back home to mother and grandmother, who are not going to be happy and are going to put pressure. There's been calls. President Zelensky of Ukraine has called on the Russian people to rise up and resist the war. There already have been large demonstrations in Moscow and many arrests actually of the demonstrators. So the Russian people themselves, I think, know deep down that this is a very, very bad war, and that it's not good for them. It's not good for the world. Unfortunately, they're under the thumb of this dictator named Vladimir Putin.
Mhm. And what's the most likely scenario coming out of this, Dr. Kaur? Are you seeing Russia finally take over Kiev? Will they put up its own government there? Are you seeing them? You said that it might be difficult for them to reach the Baltic states, but how long will this conflict play out?
Yeah, I don't think that they're going to go for the Baltic states. That's much too much to bite off for them because the Baltic states are NATO. But I do think they will be able to take over the cities of Ukraine. I think they will be able to take Kiev. And I think it will be a fairly, it could be a very long drawn out war, like a year or even 10 years. But I think it's going to grind down Russia immensely. Russia will have to turn to China.
We apologize for that technical glitch. We go back to our discussion on the crisis in Ukraine with international security analyst Anders Kaur. So, Dr. Kaur, how do you see this conflict playing out? Are you seeing Russia taking over Kiev, putting up a government there? Will he go for Baltic states? And in the meantime, what can the NATO or the UN should do about this?
Well, I think that we are likely to see Russian takeover of Kiev, actually probably Lviv too, all of Ukraine basically. But I don't think they're going to be able to control every inch of territory. The country is about the size of Afghanistan. Russia's only putting in about 190,000 troops. That's about how many we had in Afghanistan. And it just isn't enough to cover it all. So they're going to be vulnerable from guerrilla strikes from the Ukrainian forces that are probably scattering at this point to hit them where and when they deem best. I don't think Putin's going to go into the Baltic states because they're NATO states, and that would cause a much broader escalation in the war. And I think there's a lot we can do. There's more economic sanctions. I think that we're going to be cutting out Russia from most of the international financial systems, possibly even from the SWIFT interbank transfer system, which is the mother of all economic sanctions. It's never been tried before. It's something I've been advocating for years for Russia. And there's, basically providing the Ukrainians with the weapons that they need and that are appropriate for the insurgent, what's becoming an insurgent struggle, probably against a puppet Russian government in Kiev. So I think that's how it's going to play out. I don't think that the Russian people will put up with this for long. I'm hoping that the Russian people somehow rise up against Putin and get rid of the guy and turn Russia into a democracy. That would be an ideal outcome of this. And I think we have that as an opportunity and a goal that we should be looking forward to.
And lastly, the implications on this, particularly on the Pacific. Is this going to be a precedent for China potentially taking over Taiwan? Are those concerns valid?
I think it's definitely valid. I think there has been a danger that as Europe and the United States get sucked into a war in Eastern Europe, that they will lose power and steam for containing China in Asia. At that point, China may see an opportunity to try to take Taiwan or even do more things in the West Philippine Sea in terms of controlling it even more than they already do.
All right, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Dr. Anders Kaur.
Thank you very much.